Hello patrons, part 38 of the Man with No Name painting tutorial. Darren Carnell here. Hello, welcome to my studio. We are starting to texture this now. We did in the last video all the shapes, but the basic lines of the shapes. In between videos I filled out all of these, made them all square, made them thicker, made them the correct shape. I repainted those bits which I wasn't happy with, so I completely painted over them, started again, made them much better now, and done all of that. So that is now looking... It's really awkward doing this in reverse. How it should. And that's the front with the slightly more green underneath, and that's the back. It's very good now. What we're doing today, nice and quick. The last few videos when I was doing all of this was slow and boring, and I was sitting there in almost silence, just sort of focusing on my lines and painting, and it's very dull. We're on to good, interesting, sloppy, messy, quick stuff now. So all these lines were painted in cream. They weren't painted in white, they were painted in cream, so they are already off-white, but we are going to put some layers on top of them in some browns and greys to make them look a little bit dirty, a little bit old, and a little bit more set back into the fabric, so they don't look like a white thing that's been painted on top. They are allowed to be uneven, because if you look at the real one, the embroidery, it's sort of slightly different thicknesses here and there, so we don't have to make these all exactly the same colour. In fact, we don't want them to be all the same colour. So we're going to do some greys here, some browns here, mixture here, leave some there, thicker there, all different, but enough to set it back and age it and make it look like it's part of the fabric and it's been worn. When that's done, we're going to go onto the fabric itself, and I just want to add some texture and detail and variation to the actual fabric itself. So that's going to be some brush bristle flicking, some dabs and dots of random thin colour here and there, bits of light, bits of dark, just to break it up and make it look like, well, look at this, this is an old piece of fabric. And then we're done with the poncho. So I'm going to bring in the camera. We'll get straight to it because we can now. There's not a lot of explaining to do. So if I bring this in, that should be roughly the right place. Let's put it on with me in the corner straight away. Where are we? Okay, cool. Hello. Right, so let me, if I get that water there, put some thinner there. Now, I normally have stuff on this side when I'm painting heads, because I can hold the head and it's easy to have it out the way. I've got everything on this side now. I've got the palette there, I've got my water there, I've got my kitchen roll there, you don't really need to see any of that, and my paints and brushes are where they normally are, which is there, and that is there. And I've zoomed the camera out because this is a big thing on the desk, and if we want to zoom in tight, we can do that when we need to. Okay, let's get on with this. Let me just double check that everything's going. The audio is on, the counter is ticking, the music is on. The music might be a little bit loud. Let me knock the music down a bit. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what brush, because this is sort of quite messy stuff. So I don't know, let's grab that one. Why not? Excuse me. Alright, I want some leather brown and I want some dark grey. I think I'm going to be able to do everything with those two, because This is going to be thin layers going on top. Ooh, that needs mixing up. Clearly not used the grey for a while, and it separated. I'm going to be doing on the white bits thin washes, and I'm just going to be dabbing it here and there, making it deliberately uneven, but going over everything. And some bits are going to be more grey than others, some bits are going to be more brown than others, some bits are going to be an equal mix. The point is, it's all a little bit different, but it's made of grey and brown, just because in looking at the pictures, it's not what I wanted. In looking at the pictures, it looks like it needs some grey and brown on it, so I just thought, you know what, those two colours will do. Get rid of that paint that I've just got off my fingertips because I don't want to accidentally put it on the statue. So leather brown, give it a shake. Ow! I just pulled my shoulder. Well, if that doesn't show how unfit I am at the moment, I don't know what does. Ow! Seriously, that hurt. I've done something in my shoulder joint by shaking a paint pot. Oh, that's bad. Okay, because I'm going to use quite a lot of water, so I'm going to get some grey, blob some grey in there, just put a little bit of grey in there, you can't really see it on camera much. I'm going to get some brown, blob some brown in there. I'm going to get a load of water because we need this to be thin, 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 thin. Because it's better to do this subtly and make it thinner than you need, and to then go back and do extra layers, than to do it too thick and realise that you've got to paint over the things all over again, which we don't want because that's extra work. And we don't want extra work because it's work. Okay, so if I take some of that and just let's get some more water in there. So I'm making this is sort of, I'm making brown and grey water soup. It's just very liquidy, very, very liquidy, but very, very thin, and it may still end up being too thick, but we will see. Let's see. How can I hold this? You know what? I can probably zoom in on that if I just call up the settings a second, because to show the whole thing, it's great having it zoomed out, but if I can zoom in a bit better, then you can see what I'm doing. Right, so I can't even remember what I put on the brush there. It might have been grey. And I just want to test it by doing a bit. Let's just paint over the whole thing. Get rid of some of the excess around the edges. And now I'm just going to soak up a little bit of brown into the brush and go blob, blob, blob. A few random places. And let that dry. And it's just going to be a bit darker and a bit set back, which is exactly what we want. So let's take some more brown, wipe off the excess. I'm just going to paint over these light bits. And what I don't want is for it to ever look like it's water that's sort of pooling in a puddle shape, because this is supposed to be embroidered fabric, embroidery on top of fabric, so I don't want it to ever look like puddles of water, but it can look like just a bit of change in the shape. Let's go back, put some more in there. Not the shape, but the shade. I want it to be a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, but to look less painted. Now we're going to use a lot on here, so I'm going to keep going back on this bit, because when it's folded underneath, I want that to be more in shadow, so as that dries I'll come back and put more on this bit. Same with there. So I'm just going to paint over the whole lot. I'm just unevenly covering all of the bits, but making sure I do cover all the bits, and then going back with different amounts of browns and greys and just making it varied. And where that's dried up at the top, I'm going to go back to it. It hasn't fully dried, but it's dried enough that I can put another layer on top. Now, looking at my preview, it looks quite the light bits on camera look quite bleached out, like the white. I don't know if they're showing up properly for you. They're starting to look darker here, but on camera, as I'm looking at them on my screen, they're still looking quite bright, which they're not. So if that's the case, then I will show you properly afterwards how they actually look to the eye. Heavy. Just randomly dotting stuff everywhere. Oh, mind you, it's not on autofocus, so I can't really. Let me see if I can change the focus. Where's the focus? Right. Where are we? I don't even know where the camera is. See, they look quite bright. I'd have to dim the brightness right down. Let me see if I can. So what I'm doing is going, if I get some more, if I get some brown on the brush, where are we? And I'm just randomly but carefully doing bits on it, and sometimes I'll just paint over the whole thing, and sometimes I'll just be doing bits and turning the brush around so I get a different shape. And then when it dries, where's the focus? Back down there, and put the brightness up a little bit. So when it dries, it's just not so, jumping out in your face like a brand new thing that's been painted. It just looks like it's, well, it's sort of part of the fabric, and it's been there a while. Now with these thin bits, I want them set back because they're thinner than the outside lines. An easy way to make them look pushed back is just to darken them slightly. They are roughly the right thickness, but they sort of look painted on, and by pushing them back, it just makes them look less like, they were put on top. Now, the problem with doing this is that I can't really turn it over until I'm done with all of this. Okay, let's get some grey. Wow, this really gives you cramp quickly when you're holding it. Okay, blob blob, blob blob, blob blob, blob blob blob. Now we painted over the thin stripes with a wash of brown, so I'm going over now and I'm randomly dabbing grey all over it, but not everywhere. I mean, I'm going over the whole thing, but I'm not covering every bit. I'm leaving some bits that are just brown, and some bits are going to be a mixture of the two. Some bits are going to have more grey, but and some bits are going to be left to be brighter. But I want just the whole thing in general. Oh god, that's heavy. This series is essentially going to be 40 videos of me complaining how heavy the statue is. So when it's dry, it'll just look a bit darker and a bit, hopefully, less obvious. And so you'll see it, but it won't really feel like a thing that's jumping out at you, because it'll sort of look like it's been there forever. And once this is done, I'm going to do sort of the same thing that I'm doing here, like where it's very thin washes of randomly dabbed around. Sorry, that bit was off camera there. So, you know, here and there, some bits more than others, just to make it darker and lighter. I'm going to be doing that over sort of the whole thing, the entire area of fabric, the whole poncho, because we've got the colours right and we've got the embroidered shapes right, but I then want the fabric to look like it's not a painted piece of plastic, but it's, you know, it's a thing that's made of many layers of woven thread, so it looks a bit broken up and sort of alive, as in it's not a flat piece of plastic. It's made of different pieces, and so we're going to do this over the whole thing and some flicking and whatever, just to break it up and make it look like, well, there's more going on than what you're immediately seeing. If you looked at it under a microscope or really close, you'd see, oh, it's made of all these threads, and we just want to break it up like that. Also, to make it look like it's been out in the desert and this guy is wearing it, and sometimes he sits down and maybe he leans up against a wall, or sometimes he'll put it on the floor, and sometimes it might get scraped against a bush. I couldn't think of the name of a bush. But just to look like it's had a life. So we'll be doing that over the whole thing. But it's essentially what I'm doing here, which is just darkening all these bits to make them look part of the fabric. I'm going to leave that back bit for now. I'm just going to put my brush down so I can use my extra hand here. Let's see, so where's that? Can't grab hold of that because that's still wet. I grab hold of this is difficult. Alright, I'm just going to have to balance that and be careful. Oh, excuse me. Alright, get some brown. So, doing the same thing. Are we on camera? Yeah. So So first coat is just over everything. I don't mind if some bits are thicker than others, and the first coat is just brown because it goes with the colour of the poncho and also the colour of the embroidery. When it's brand new, when you see people wearing replicas, it's white, but when you look at his, it's not really it. There's a couple of scenes where it looks lighter than others, but most of the time it looks sort of brown. But then you look closely and it's got grey bits to it and bits that are darker, bits that are lighter, but it's sort of got this brown tint to the whole thing, and that goes with the brown tint that the entire poncho gets over the course of him wearing it for all the films, because as we know, it started out sort of greenish, and the more he wore it and the longer he was using it, it went browner and browner until the outside was more brown than green. And that's why everybody's replicas, whenever they paint figures, statues or whatever, they always just do it flat brown because they think that's what colour it is, but it's not. It's just got old and dirty and used. And that same thing happens to the embroidery as well, which is why we want it to look a bit brown everywhere. So I'm just putting a layer of brown on everything, and then go in with, I'm just going to lean this front down there to take some of the weight because, oh my god. Can we see that? Yeah, sort of. So brown everywhere, but I don't mind if some bits have more liquid on. I don't mind if some bits get missed. Because we're going to be going over everything anyway, and adding greys and adding more browns and making bits darker. So this is just to set it back into a fabric. Okay, so I'm going to go in with some grey while that's wet, and I don't want much, but just some random bits here and there. Sorry, wasn't paying attention. Now what I'm doing might take several layers of, you know, doing it, letting it dry, doing it, letting it dry, or I may do it the way I'm doing it now, where I'm putting stuff on top of still sort of wet previous stuff, so it mixes in a little bit. And it might happen that I do all that and it's like, you know what, that's quite good as it is. Or I may do it and look at it and go, right, that needs to be a bit darker, or to have the, you know, the shade changed subtly somehow. But I'll only really know that once it's all dry. Okay, so while that stuff dries, I'm going to turn it round again. Now this front stuff has mostly dried, so let me have another look at it. That's actually looking really good. I'm just going to do a few other random bits, but thin bits. Well, that's already looking quite good. probably doesn't show up on camera. Let me zoom it out. Where's the zoom? And again, it's sort of, the contrast shows it more as still being white, whereas I can see it's very certainly a browny grey, but it looks less deliberately like a thing that was painted on top to my eyes. I want it dried. I think that'll be good, and I want to go on top with the texture of the poncho. Oh, I'm really struggling to remember my words today. Once I go over and put texture all over the poncho, that'll add to it, and then the age and the variations and the subtleties that I want to put in the fabric, all of that will add to it. And then when we go on top, either the next process segment, whatever, the next time that we do it, we go in and we add some weathering, or we might do that at the end after we've done some other things. That will add to it as well, and it will all just help it make it all just, wow, I really can't talk today, holy crap. It will really just make it look like an old thing that's been in the desert a lot. There you go. I'm quite happy with that. That's good. Now, I wish I could lay it down on its back, but I can't because they're still drying. The front is relatively dry, so I'm going to put it down that way. Now then, let's see. Oh, excuse me. So I wanted to add some textures, and I've got some pictures of his poncho, and in different lights, in different shots, in different photos, it looks different every time. Sometimes it looks like a lightish brown, sometimes it looks like it's really quite dark. So I'm going to do the usual thing and find a balance between all of the images, all of the different ways that we are used to seeing it, the memories that we have. Because this is the thing, when you've got a thing that's in a film, let's say, I don't know, something in Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon or something. Over time, over a few films, you build up an overall memory of what a thing is like, even if that thing isn't actually like that all the time. Using the Millennium Falcon as an example, everyone knows what that looks like, except it's different in the original Star Wars to how it is in Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and it's different again in The Force Awakens. But we sort of have this built up memory, which is bits of all the different things that we've seen, the engines of how it looked in one film, and the shape of the weathering and the paint job, how it looked in another film. And even though things have changed, we build up a memory, and that happens with stuff like this. So even though in some of his scenes the poncho looks more weathered and more old and more light coloured, like, you know, more worn down than it does in other shots, you build up a visual memory of something. So I'm going to paint it like that. I'm going to take all of the images that I've seen, that I've got. That was my phone. Ignore that a second. Go away, phone. My phone has a thing that listens out for my voice, and if I say a certain phrase, it thinks I'm asking it a question and it bleeps and comes to life. I didn't say that phrase, but sometimes it thinks I did. So all of the different pictures that you see of that poncho, all of the different scenes in the films, I'm going to put them all together, and I'm painting them as a mixture of all of that put together, and it will hopefully look like him, how we remember him, even though it may not be how he looks in all of the shots in all of the films. You know what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do, because some of it's lighter and some of it's darker, I'm gonna just looking at a few pictures here, because I don't want to do too much because frankly it doesn't really need it. It's not a big chunky textured fabric. It's quite smooth looking even when you see it quite close, but there is variation in the colouring of it. So if I get what I've already got, the greys and the browns there, and if I get some umber to add some dark. Oh, I've just noticed my little webcam in the corner has frozen. Oh dear. That's no good. Oh dear. Okay, let's just go back to this one. Seeing as that's working, and I'll carry on, and I just won't go back to that corner, because in order to reset that I'm going to have to pull the camera out and restart it, and if I do that, it'll probably, once I pull one webcam out, it usually freezes the other one, and seeing as this is still working, this one, I'm going to carry on, because it's better to do that than to have to start the whole thing again, and sometimes it makes me have to reset the computer, and it's a load of hassle. So I'm going to keep going while this is working, and you will just have the joy of not seeing my face again in this video. Aren't you lucky? Right, so I'm going to get some umber, not much, and also I just noticed there's not much in that paint pot. Now I'm mixing a load of umber here at the top, and now what's going to happen, some of it's going to run down into that grey, which I actually don't mind. I'm going to be mixing it sort of together anyway, but it'll be slightly different because I'm not deliberately mixing the grey and the umber together. It's just run down into it, so some of this around the edge is more grey, some of this here is more umber, but it's all very thin watery down stuff. And we've obviously got this brown as well, which I can come to when I want. Now then, I get some darker stuff. Now the problem is those bits I've just painted are still sort of drying. I'll go across the bottom first. Let's see how. Actually, you know what? Change that. Change that. Right, so I'm just going to get some water and wet across to, let's say, to that middle ridge. So I'm just wetting the surface, and it's sort of marbling and running together because it's a shiny surface, so it's not being perfect how it's doing it, but it's still mostly wet all over the place. And while that's wet, I can't really see it. Oh, there you go. See how it's shiny and wet? And while it's wet, I'm going on with the mixture of umber and grey, and I'm dabbing it all over the place. It's actually a bit too grey. It needs to be darker. I might have to drop a little bit of black into this, I don't know. Tell you what, let's separate it. Let's do pure umber in another one of the things, because I think the grey was causing a problem and making it appear lighter because there's too much grey. So what I'm doing is dabbing random blobs of that umber all over the place, letting it mix in with the water that I put everywhere. I don't want things to dry as drops of liquid on the surface, because the drops of liquid always look like drops of liquid. What I'm trying to do is I put the drops on, and then as they start to dry, I'm going in and blending the edges so there are just random dark patches that are a bit blended in. And hopefully, although it's hard to tell and it still looks lighter at the moment, this may be a method that doesn't really work. When I paint it on, it sort of looks... No, I don't like that. Let's get rid of that. Right. Get rid of that, get rid of that. What I might need to do instead of umber is mix a bit of black in there to make it even darker. It's difficult to tell. Because it won't show as the final colour until it's fully dry. I don't want it to dry too quickly. I don't want to put a hairdryer on it because I want to be able to see how it's drying. But because it's taking its time, I actually think that that's too subtle to be noticeable, and also hasn't really gone. Umber by itself is darker than this colour that I have here, which is sort of mostly chocolate brown, but putting it on thin mixed with water has sort of made it appear lighter, which isn't really having the effect that I want. What I might do is get some umber mixed with a bit of black and darken it and try that again, or wet it and bristle flick it on instead of painting it on, because it's sort of the same technique that I used on this thing, just to get different colours here and there. But I thought the umber by itself would have worked, but it wasn't dark enough. I think it's made some difference, but it's so subtle that it's hard for me to tell. So what I'm going to do properly is I'm going to let that all dry completely, so I can come back to it and know that when I'm doing something, I'm not going to wipe off a layer of paint that I've just put on. When it's dry, I can do anything over the top of it and it will be fine. So what I'm going to do, this has been 3/4 of an hour already. I'm going to let all of that stuff dry that I did, all of these layers on this, making this a little bit pushed back into the fabric. And then I'm going to come back with, when it's all properly dry, with some umber, but mixed with a little bit of black, so it's darker than what I thought it needed to be. Clearly needs to be a little bit darker again. And we're then going to go in and randomly smush it around and just make things a little bit varied here and there, just to change the thing. But I don't want to go over the whole lot. I'm just doing bits of it to add some variation. And we'll do the same over here, and at some point I'll flick some stuff on it just to break it up a little bit more again. But we'll do that in the next one once this is dried properly. Let me check one last time. No, I'm still frozen. Oh no. Okay, let's go back to this. I just have to do it all with my hands. Okay, so this is done. We're going to let all this dry. I suppose I could... Hello? And then we'll come back in the next one and we'll have some dark paint, and darker than that, because that was when it went on lighter than I thought and didn't make enough of a difference to let me see what I was actually doing, because it's going on quite a dark colour as it is. And we'll do that again once I know that I can paint on this without messing anything up. And that's it. Okay, that's number 38 done. I will come back in the next one and we will do the final lot of subtle shading and stuff on the poncho. We'll add some darker bits, we'll add some highlights, we'll add some old bits. We'll go over the whole thing and just give it some variation enough that it looks a bit old and a bit real. I'm not going to go down to microscopic levels because it's quite a smooth looking fabric, so I don't need to make any big chunky textures, just enough to break it up a little bit. And it already is because of how we painted it, but just to get some more shadow and texture and variation to it. So we're going to do that, and then once that is done we can go on to, I don't know, his gun or the shirt, or we can, you know, try and, I don't know, we'll do something. Probably the shirt. And we've obviously got to do the belts here. And I think that's supposed to be shirt as well under there. Or is that jeans? That might be jeans. Yeah, that's supposed to be jeans. So that gets painted dark in there. So we will do something. But for now, seeing as my webcam isn't working, thanks for sticking around, thanks for watching this. It probably on camera looks like we haven't changed anything at all, but trust me, to my eyes, all of this embroidery stuff looks a little bit darker, a little bit older, a little bit more set back, and that's enough just to make it look less like a brand new thing that was painted on top, and that's what we wanted. And in the next one we'll just add some age and texture to the poncho, and then we can carry on. Cool. Right, I'm going to just go quickly now because you can't see me, so I can't talk to you. Take care, guys. I will come back in part 39 and hopefully both my cameras will be working. Take care. Bye. I can't even wave. Which way do I have to wave? That way. Okay. Bye.